Hello! So today I once again started with gel nail polish as a base and just buffed it and applied a regular nail polish base coat on it. And then I'm using this green Sinful colors nail polish and I'm using an extra thick layer here. Because of the strength that the gel nail polish gives, I don't really feel like having to apply 2 layers of color because it's not actually needed for extra strength. So what I did instead is just apply an extra thick coat so that it'll cover in one coat. And if you're doing this as well, do make sure to not accidentally float the cuticles with it. And then on the 2 nails that aren't going to get any paint on them, I'm going to use this one by China Glaze. It's Fairy Dust, which is fitting for Fairytale nail art, I guess. And yeah, if you're not using gel nail polish as a base, you could just use, you know, like a regular sort of sheer nude nail polish. And then going back to the middle 3 nails, I'm using this paler shade by Sinful colors. I'll just list everything down below in the description box as usual, by the way. And I'm just using a very well used sponge to sponge some random pale green blotches on it. If you don't want to risk making a mess, you could just use liquid latex around it, but I didn't find it necessary this time. And then it's time for painting. So I pretty much just, well, I didn't really focus on the entire Fairytale, but mostly just on the prince. So I painted the rose and the prince himself and then a nightingale. So I just did that with acrylic paint and a little tiny detail brush. And the fun thing with acrylic paint is it does dry quick enough, but it doesn't dry too quickly. So you can just mix it a little bit while it's on the nail so you can get a really nice pattern. And yeah, I guess it's not a very famous Fairytale, by the way, so I'll just quickly tell you what it's about. And yeah, I have very suckish storytelling skills when I'm literally just, you know, telling it in words, like speaking it out loud. But yeah, in rough lines, if you want to know, like, you know, the real Fairytale and read it in a fun way, then just look it up on the internet. I think it's by Anderson, I think, but I'm not sure. Anyway, point is, yeah, it's about a prince, and it's actually a pretty poor prince. Like, he doesn't have a lot of money or huge land, but he does want to get married, and so he wants to marry the princess of like a huge kingdom, like, you know, like the most wealthy princess around. So he sends her a rose from his father's grave, from a bush that only blooms every 5 years, and also a nightingale. So like really thoughtful, you know, precious gifts. But because they're not fake and expensive, she rejects them and rejects him. So then he goes to the castle, to her castle, and gets a job there as a swineherd. And then proceeds to like try to bribe her with, like, you know, like she doesn't know that he's a prince, obviously. So he tries to bribe her into kissing him by making all sorts of like random gadgets, like, you know, like faintly magical gadgets, but things that only took him 1 single day to make. So yeah, and in return for those things, she has to like kiss him like 10 times and later 100 times. And just to prove that she's actually just, you know, rather spoiled and, you know, rejects like actually thoughtful gifts, but, you know, is very willing to kiss a simple swineherd for some gadgets. And then her father sees it, gets angry, and kicks them both out, at which point the prince hides behind a tree and redresses into his prince clothes, which he somehow managed to stuff in his pockets. Somehow, yeah. I never quite understood that part of the story, but that's how it goes. And then, yeah, he just reveals himself to her as a prince, and she suddenly regrets never going with him in the first place. And then he tells her that he no longer wants her because he thinks she's spoiled brat, or something along those lines. And then he just leaves her there and goes home. Which I always thought was pretty funny for a Fairytale. Like, it's really not a classical Fairytale thing, but yeah. That's why I probably always liked the story, because it's not the typical classical Fairytale. But yeah, that's how the Fairytale goes. So yeah, pretty much again on the first nail I just painted the rose, then the prince himself on the nail beside that, and then here on the last nail I'm just painting the nightingale, which actually, according to the book, is like more of a cooler shade of brown, but I didn't have a cooler shade of brown, so I just, you know, had to make do with what I had. And yeah, of course you can also just easily mix acrylic paints, like I did it as well, to just get the perfect shades. And just made a little branch for him to sit on. Oh, and at this point I also remembered I forgot to paint the rose that the prince is plucking from the bush. So yeah, I just went back to my middle nail there and just painted a little rose. And at any point, by the way, if you completely screw it up, you can always wash it off with water. That's like another beautiful thing of acrylic paint. You can just wash it off with water and just start over if necessary. But yeah, once everything was on there and completely dry, I went ahead and added top coats. I'm using a very thick one and I'm using a huge amount. Just so my brush doesn't scrape over the paint, because that, you know, will give it a risk of actually dragging out the paint, which you don't want, obviously. So yeah, I was pretty careful with it. And then that's the finished nail art look. This actually took me way less time than I thought it would. Like, it only took me like half an hour to paint all of this. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching this. Thank you very much for watching and see you next time. Bye! Green shade by OPI. And a dotting tool and yeah. Then I accidentally screwed up. That happens a lot because I'm filming at an awkward angle. And